Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish to raise the issue of funding of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Minister for agreeing that the Honourable Member for Birmingham Erdington can also address the House tonight. He does have valuable experience not only in the trade union arena but in this arena also, having served, as I understand it, on the board of a previous and predecessor body. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's pertinent that we discuss this issue today because not only is it Ash Wednesday, not only is it the day when we celebrate the patron saint of the great nation of Wales, but it's also, as my good friend Ryan McMillan told me, a former colleague in Glasgow City Council, it is also Disabled Access Day. Perhaps we can touch on those issues later on. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been pursuing the need for a debate on this urgent issue, but I'm profoundly disappointed at the actions that have created the need for one. Because as a result of cuts to the funding of the Commission, workplace relations have suffered and individual employees have been unfairly treated. This morning I visited the picket line in London of PCS and Unite members who are on their 6th day of industrial action. That a government-sponsored, government-funded body with a remit set by this Parliament with a specific mandate to challenge discrimination, promote equality of opportunity and to promote and to protect and promote human rights should, on the 9th of February 2017, callously sack 10 PCS and Unite members by email while they were on strike and giving them less than 1 day's notice to clear their desks is unheard of in the public sector. I'll give way on it.
I'm attending this debate tonight after my honourable friend made me aware of this very serious situation. But is he really informing and telling the House that the body that was established by the government to look after, safeguard and monitor the citizens of this country, their rights, that they're acting in such a scandalous way? If it is, does he not think this is a clear roadmap of where this government's taking the trade union movement and its rights in this country?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that, and yes, I do have concerns about how the government is conducting industrial relations across the board and its attacks on the trade union movement, as we saw during the passage of the trade union bill. The treatment of the workers concerned is not only harsh, but I would argue potentially discriminatory and contrary to everything the organisation is tasked by this House with delivering. By imposing pay in lieu of notice and terminating the employee's contract, this means they can no longer actively search for redeployment within their existing organisation or within the civil service where they get priority access to vacancies. Their continuous service is broken. I'll give way on that point.
Honourable Member in securing this debate. Would he not also agree that it's going to be expensive for the public purse? For 6 months we'll be paying these people to stay at home, while as I understand it the EHRC will be plugging staffing gaps with expensive consultants.
My honourable friend who serves with me on the European Scrutiny Committee is quite correct in her analysis of that. Their continuous service is broken, so if the employee were to secure a job in the civil service, the break has a directly negative impact on their pension and any future severance pay. Madam Deputy Speaker, I note that 2 directors were also served notice, but pay in lieu of notice was not imposed and they remain on the payroll. To date, the Commission has not offered any of those at risk of compulsory redundancy alternative employment, which is a statutory requirement. I hope the Minister today will confirm if he will intervene in this matter and ensure that all those, now numbering 12 employees, will be reinstated. I give way.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. The organisation was set up in the first place through pressure from the trade union labour movement regarding human rights and obviously workers' rights. We've had 2 good examples now where this government's going under Brexit. We've had the trade union bill that had to be modified through pressure from this side of the House. What do we now expect when the government comes back with its package from Brexit and if they pull out of Europe? What's going to happen to workers' rights then, bearing in mind that they've done away with legal aid for certain instances?
I thank my honourable friend for that. I would actually say that he is correct that there was concessions given to this side of the House, but I think the government are backtracking on those concessions, as we saw during the Delegated Legislation Committee, where we saw that trade unions are now being forced to have additional conferences to meet the new legislation. I'll give way on it.
Very grateful, and can I also congratulate my honourable friend for securing this debate tonight. Would he confirm that one of the other things that the government is backtracking on in respect of this is funding for this organisation? Because we've seen in a year in which hate crime has doubled in this country, the funding for the Commission has been cut by 25%, the staffing has been cut by 25%, and does he agree with me that it's absolutely extraordinary that the body that is the watchdog on behalf of the government in respect of disabled people's rights in this country, one of the most important watchdogs, is sacking disabled workers at a day's notice?
I agree wholeheartedly with my honourable friend. I'm going to come to all those points in exact detail, and if he wishes to intervene, I'd be more than happy to give way to him again. I would invite members to look closely at who was chosen for compulsory redundancy and who was then sacked by email, highlighted in early day motion 944. Because of the 10 sacked members, 7 are BME, 4 are Muslim, 6 are disabled. And I would hope that no one is going to challenge the arithmetic on that, as it's possible to have overlapping identities. As I understand the situation, Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the staff members dismissed is an army veteran who found that his motorised wheelchair was taken away the day after he received his redundancy notice. 3 of the sacked members held elected roles on the union's branch executive committee, and 1 was a trade union negotiator leading talks to protect employees from compulsory redundancy. Madam Deputy Speaker, this raises concerns about blacklisting and trade union victimisation throughout the ongoing restructuring process, but it's also not difficult to conclude that certain types of employees have been targeted and potentially discriminated against. Not only is this utterly wrong in of itself, but astonishing that it should come from the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Well, there seems to be a choice, but I'll give way to my fellow member of the European Scrutiny Committee.
I'm very grateful. He's making a really powerful case. I wonder if he'd like to comment on the impact this is likely to have on other employers' behaviour when they see the body charged with upholding the highest of standards, getting away with this kind of conduct.
I think that's an excellent point by my honourable friend, and I think it does send a very dangerous message to rogue employers that if they see the Commission conducting this sort of behaviour, that it sends them a signal too.
Would he give way on that?
I'll give way again, of course.
I wonder if he'd also comment on what he thinks the impact of these sackings will have on the government's stated aim of halving the disability employment gap in this country, given that, as he says, 5 of the people who've been sacked are themselves disabled.
I thank my honourable friend again for that intervention, and I think that it shows that the government say one thing in public and do another thing in private, and that's the only message that we could take from that. In the realms of you really couldn't make this up, and nor can the government absolve itself of any responsibility for this surreal situation. Because increasingly ministerial responses in this issue are becoming a little tetchy, Madam Deputy Speaker, and are along the lines of, this isn't really anything to do with us. As I said before, government-sponsored, government-funded, publicly accountable. And Madam Deputy Speaker, that is what we are doing today, giving parliamentary scrutiny to an organisation that is not acting in the spirit of its own ethos and stated aims. The strike was called because people were at risk of compulsory redundancy, even though 30 Commission vacancies are unfilled. A restructuring process has been driven by severe budget pressures, a 25% cut, as the Honourable Member for Pontypridd pointed out, over the next 4 years, coming on top of a 70% cut in real terms since 2010. As confirmed by the House Library research paper commissioned by the Honourable Member for Brent Central, a report described as ECHR facing collapse. I'll give way to Honourable.
I am very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. I wonder would he share my concern and also be pressing on the government to really give evidence that with that degree of 25% cuts, what is the risk that, in all honesty, human rights legislation exists only in paper and that human rights, in fact, will in effect be hollowed out?
Well, I agree with that point, because it comes back to the point of whether legislation can actually be enforced. Because looking at the context of the rise in hate crimes, as pointed out earlier, and a dramatic reduction in numbers of people taking cases to employment tribunals, that's with the recent figures, 71% drop in the number of cases challenging sex discrimination, 58% drop in race discrimination cases, and a 54% drop in disability discrimination cases. This surely all adds up to a mismatch between workload and resource. When the Commission is only employing 3 caseworkers to provide advice and representations to the victims of discrimination and human rights abuses in England, Scotland and Wales, it calls into question the ability of the organisation to tackle discrimination and enforce the law. Although the stated strategic aims and objectives of the Commission are sound, I particularly agree with the aim of improving capability through investing in its people, there is a huge question mark over organisational capacity, particularly in the light of confirmation of the funding picture for the future. Last week on the 24th of February, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government Equalities Office confirmed funding for the remainder of the spending review period until 2019-20. Confirmed that going forward the cuts continue. Confirmed that year-on-year funding is to decline from 20.4 million in 2016-17 to 17.4 million in 2019-20. As the need for support to individuals experiencing discrimination in all its poisonous forms grows, this government's cuts deeper into an already challenged organisation. Madam Deputy Speaker, I was curious to test the government's support for ensuring a sustainable future for the Commission by tabling a written question last December as to how and whether the government is publicising the existence of the organisation. The ministerial response was, "My department promotes the Commission's functions where appropriate in the normal course of its own activities, but since 2010 has not spent anything on advertising its services." A more suspicious person, Madam Deputy Speaker, than myself might suspect the government of seeking to suppress demand for the Commission services, making the case for further funding cuts. So could I ask the Minister today, will the Minister confirm that they will now advertise the Commission's services publicly? In response to the publicity and scrutiny given as a result of poor handling of their workforce and trade union relationships, it's interesting to note that the Commission in a briefing note to members of this House has stated that it would enhance the Commission's independence if we were able to table reports directly in Parliament, and that we consider that Parliament should be afforded a greater role in setting the Commission's budget, as is the case for other independent bodies such as the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman and the Electoral Commission. Now, I welcome the news that the organisation is open to be held to account for their use of public money by a parliamentary committee, and I'm very interested to hear from what the Minister would think of those proposals. This could provide a way forward, and if the Government were also to take responsibility for resolving the hasty and unorthodox manner in which hard-working, dedicated public servants have been treated, then a more positive outcome for the organisation and the individuals concerned could be achieved. It will be disappointing if the arm's-length rationale is deployed again today. It is often used by another organisation I am very familiar with, Glasgow City Council, where all too often the administration's councillors claim that poor industrial relations and resolving disputes are somehow out with their control. Madam Deputy Speaker, budget decisions and damaged employee relations as a result of poor consultation, communication and negotiation are ultimately the responsibility of elected members, whether local or national. Claiming that these issues are decided on and actioned by forces that cannot be held to account or directed by those who are elected by the people is an exceptionally weak argument. Fundamentally, what is at stake here is, are the equalities and human rights issues at the heart of the government's ethos or not? Actions at the moment are in variance with stated aims and objectives, and many more people in this country stand to be affected if the Commission's capacity to deliver is being run down, whether by accident or design. Madam Deputy Speaker, I look forward to the Minister's response.
The Secretary of State for Women, Equalities and Early Years, who's unable to respond to this debate due to other business, but I'm here and happy to respond on her behalf. I would also like to thank the Honourable Member for Glasgow South West in securing this important debate. It's timely, as it allows me the opportunity to confirm the budget agreed with the EHRC for the remainder of this spending review period, something which I know has been of interest to many members of the House. Before I move on to provide this detail, I wish to take a moment to remind ourselves of the context of wider government fiscal controls. At the beginning of the last Parliament, as honourable members will remember, the government inherited the largest deficit in the post-war period, and it was against this background and the very significant reductions applying to central government generally, well, we were making over 20 billion of savings by 2019-2020, that the EHRC's position needs to be seen. I can confirm that the EHRC's settlement for this spending review period amounts to a total budget of 20.4 million for 16-17, 19.3 million for 17-18, 18.3 million for 18-19, and 17.4 million for 2019-2020. Across this spending review period, since 2015-16, this equates to about a 25% reduction. Now, obviously, and as the Honourable Member for Glasgow South West has made clear, reductions in the EHRC's budget also stretch across a longer timescale than just this spending review period. With its settlement now confirmed, between 2010-2011 and 2019-2020, the EHRC will have had an approximate budget reduction of 68%. I am, however, supplying today, this evening, some context for that reduction, and if honourable members will give me a bit of time to give you that context, give them that context, most of which they did not hear from the honourable member. Okay.
The Minister giving way. But is he seriously telling the House that in the context of a current budget deficit that is around 68 billion, cutting the budget of the EHRC by 68% down to 17 million is really necessary or indeed relevant?
It is the context which I'm about to provide which I believe will help honourable members understand further and in more detail why cuts of that magnitude were appropriate. So if you and other members will just bear with me for a few seconds, I'm sure just answer the question he is about to ask. First of all, in 2007, when the EHRC was set up, it had an extraordinarily high budget to facilitate the merger of three previous bodies, the Equal Opportunities Commission, the Commission for Racial Equality, and the Disability Rights Commission, into this new body, the Equality and Human Rights Commission. The budget set was quite simply not right for the organisation during its infancy. In 2007, the HRC had a budget of £70 million, which was an astonishing £20 million more than the combined budgets of the three previous commissions. Now, the EHRC never managed to spend more than £62 million in any year. Indeed, it often struggled to spend its allocation at all, reporting significant and repeated underspends. For instance, in June 2010, the EHRC budget was reduced from £62 million to £55 million in year, yet the EHRC's actual expenditure in 2010-2011 was £48 million, of which £16.3 million, or 35% of its budget, ended up going on its own corporate costs. Second, those with longer memories will acknowledge that at the time, the organisation was poorly managed with poor spending controls, as a result of which its first three sets of accounts were all qualified. This inevitably called into question its financial controls and the amount of funding it should be given. Third, it's important to be aware that in important respects, the EHRC's budget reductions have simply reflected changes to its range of functions. A number of significant functions have been repealed or no longer funded in order to help it concentrate on its core remit. Most notably, it stopped its large grants programme, which had been mismanaged and which had cost several £million. It also lost its helpline, which cost £2.5 million a year, and its conciliation role in service provision. These functions ceased in 2012-2013 and were costed at £10.1 million, or 21% of the EHRC's budget at the time. These changes were considered as part of the review of public bodies conducted by the government in 2010. It was decided that the EHRC should be retained but substantially reformed. In March 2011, the coalition government accordingly set out plans to reform the EHRC in the consultation document Building a Fairer Britain, Reform of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. The current Prime Minister, who was at the time the Minister for Women and Equalities with her Liberal Democrat coalition partner Lynn Featherstone, set out proposals to transform the EHRC into a valued and respected national institution. And in 2012, a comprehensive budget review was set up to identify the minimum level of funding needed for the Commission to effectively discharge its statutory functions in accordance with the provisions of the Equality Act. And that review concluded that the steady state funding of £17.1 million would be adequate for the EHRC to continue to fulfil. I'm just going to give way to the Honourable Member here and then to the Honourable Lady there.
Minister for giving way. He seems to be suggesting that the 17.4 million, which will be the budget for 2019-20, is only to support the Commission's core statutory functions, as I understand the direction of travel is going in. Can I confirm that in previous years the Commission has received funding up to 7.8 million to support its wider support functions?
Good question. It is receiving money in excess, although modestly so, of the minimum amount that was regarded as necessary to support its statutory functions. That's correct.
Grateful to the Minister. I understand the point he's making about focusing the Commission on its statutory and strategic functions, but how can he be confident that it has the resources to do that well when we know that many local authorities are failing to comply with the public sector equality duty, and when we also know that the government is subject to a number of significant criticisms from UN bodies for failing to comply with our obligations under socio-economic and other rights treaties?
Well, this was the work that was undertaken during the last Parliament to assess what a minimum level of adequate funding would be to ensure that the body was in a position to discharge its statutory functions. And as I mentioned earlier, that review concluded that steady state funding of 17.1 million would be adequate. The Honourable Member for Glasgow South West raised the issue of staffing reductions, which I recognise will and are a concern to honourable members. As an independent body, it's for the EHRC to determine the level and structure of its staffing. This includes defining what grading and staff numbers are appropriate. The Commission has had to make difficult decisions in order to deliver value for money in its use of public funds, whilst also ensuring that it is furnished with the right complement of skills and experience. Once the EHRC has concluded its restructuring under the target operating model, the total number of posts will be 179. Now, the Honourable Member for Pontypridd asked about the impact of this restructuring on the government's goal of halving the disability employment gap. In terms of actual redundancies, the EHRC's restructuring affects 6 disabled staff members, but more widely, the EHRC retains good links with disabled groups, is continuing its work on disability issues, and is working with disabled groups to improve its enforcement work on disability discrimination cases specifically. The government is also working generally to combat hate crime. I shall give way again shortly. Working generally to combat hate crime, and other honourable members were asking about the impact of this restructuring on the ability of the organisation to deal with instances of hate crime. The government is working generally with police to provide a breakdown in data on religion-based hate crime to help police target resources and increase understanding. We have recently published the Hate Crime Action Plan in July 2016 and are now delivering local-based projects to tackle hate crime. We have announced additional funding for communities to increase reporting, with £2.4 million to protect places of worship and £900,000 to support community projects. We are engaging with groups to ensure we understand the public's experience of hate crime and make it easier for victims to come forward. While the EHRC needs to have regard to fostering good relations, turning specifically to points made by the Honourable Member for Birmingham Erdington, while the EHRC needs to have due regard to fostering good relations, it is not itself a criminal enforcement agency, as he knows, and has no role in prosecuting offenders. or ensuring compliance with the law in this area. It will not impact, therefore, on government's ability to tackle hate crime. Yeah, on restructuring and then on amendments.
I thank the Minister for giving way. He's saying that the Commission doesn't have duties in terms of criminal behaviour, but can I put to him, he has yet to comment on how staff were treated and were dismissed with 1 day's notice until declare their deaths. Yeah. Does the Minister believe that that is appropriate?
Here.
Okay, I'll take another intervention on the same point, and then I'll come to the Honourable Member for Pontypridd.
I thank you for giving way, and just to add to what my honourable friend said there, the Minister seemed to be alluding about strategic review of what the Commission needs to do their core work. So how does sacking people by email and sending them home actually comply with a strategic review? There's no way that can be a skill-based assessment.
Turning to the points about restructuring, honourable members will know that the EHRC has followed a multi-stage process to mitigate against the impact of job losses on all staff, including consideration of those with protected characteristics. The Commission is confident the processes undertaken to date have been fair, evidence-based and transparent. Trade unions have been extensively consulted to offer every alternative to compulsory redundancy where possible. Despite that, they have called 5 strikes in recent months. The EHRC is no longer, happily, the focus for the tabloids' wrath. Its accounts have not been qualified for 5 years. It has provided respected policy interventions on stop and search, the treatment of religion in the workplace, and pregnancy and maternity discrimination. It has intervened successfully to help enforce the equality and human rights at the European Court of Human Rights. I'm going to give way, but it's got to be quick because we're running out of time.
Very grateful for the Minister being very generous, and he's trying to answer our questions, but I'm afraid in so doing he is making our case for us, because he has just admitted that 6 of those people who are being sacked here are disabled, which is clearly going to add to the Disability Employment Act, and in conceding that we are seeing a rising tide of hate crime, in spite of the fact that we have this commission, he is surely making the point that the 17 million it currently has to support its work is inadequate. Right.
I think the honourable member needs to look at the HRC's restructuring in the context of its ability to carry out its broader work on behalf of supporting people with disabilities to ensure that their rights aren't affected by their disabilities in terms of their ability to access opportunities in the workplace. As the NAO notes, the EHRC has responded to its budget reductions in a number of ways, working increasingly in partnership with other organisations and being more selective in the legal cases it takes on, taking on cases with the potential for the most impact, enhancing its overall effectiveness. We are working with the EHRC to further increase its effectiveness. We share the view that members of the Women and Equalities Committee expressed in January that the EHRC should play to its unique strengths and powers as provided in its legislation framework by making more selective legal interventions and leaving the research to other bodies which can already fulfil that function.
Commissioner. I think the Minister has been very generous, but he must appreciate the anger felt by honourable members on this side of the House about how staff were treated and sacked effectively by email. In working with the Commission, will the Minister confirm that perhaps the Commission will be given some human resources and personnel advice and expertise by government departments? And is the Minister going to intervene on the concerns we have on those staff who have been sacked?
We are satisfied that the EHRC has conducted its restructuring in an appropriate manner, consulting all the relevant partner bodies as required. Honourable members, I understand that the Chair, David Isaac, shares this objective of the EHRC sticking to its legislative framework, and my colleague...
Order. I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.